Most people know Audrey Hepburn as Hollywood's eternal style icon and the enchanting Holly Golightly, but behind her graceful exterior lay shocking secrets that would make your jaw drop. From surviving Nazi occupation as a teenage resistance spy to eating tulip bulbs to avoid starvation, from owning a pet deer named Pippin to secretly smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day, this beloved actress's real life was far more dramatic and surprising than any role she ever played. Here are 15 things you never knew about Audrey Hepburn. Fact 1. Teenage resistance spy. While most 16-year-olds were worrying about school dances and homework, Audrey Hepburn was risking her life as a spy for the Dutch resistance during World War II. When the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in 1940, 11-year-old Audrey found herself trapped in the occupied territory of Arnhem with her mother, and what started as a temporary stay turned into 5 years of living under brutal German rule. As the war dragged on and Audrey grew into her teens, she couldn't just stand by and watch the horrors happening around her, especially after 2 of her uncles were executed by the Nazis in 1942. She began secretly working with the Dutch resistance, carrying coded messages and underground newspapers to Allied forces, cleverly hiding these dangerous documents inside her ballet shoes where German soldiers would never think to look. But Audrey's most remarkable contribution to the resistance effort came through her greatest passion: dance. Having trained in ballet since she was 5 years old, she organized what were called black performances, secret recitals held in hidden venues to raise desperately needed money for the underground movement. These weren't your typical dance performances, though. The audience had to sit in complete silence because even the smallest sound of applause could alert German patrols and mean certain death for everyone involved. Picture this: a teenage Audrey, gracefully performing complex ballet routines, while dozens of people watched in total silence, knowing that Nazi soldiers could burst through the doors at any moment. The tension in those rooms must have been incredible, with only the soft sounds of Audrey's footsteps and the rustling of her costume breaking the deadly quiet. After each performance, instead of the usual cheers and clapping, the audience would simply smile and nod their appreciation before quietly slipping away into the night. Years later, Audrey would reflect on this terrifying period by saying, "There is probably nothing in the world as determined as a child with a dream, and I wanted to dance more than I feared the Germans." Her courage as a teenager, using her artistic talents to fight against one of history's most evil regimes, shows just how extraordinary this future Hollywood icon really was, even before she ever stepped foot on a movie set. Fact 2. She ate tulip bulbs to survive. The elegant Audrey Hepburn that the world came to know and love was actually shaped by one of the most devastating periods in modern history, when she and her family were forced to eat tulip bulbs just to stay alive. During the brutal winter of 1944 to 1945, the German forces controlling the Netherlands deliberately blocked food supplies from reaching the Dutch people in what became known as the Hunger Winter. With grocery stores empty and no relief in sight, 15-year-old Audrey watched her family grow weaker and more desperate by the day. Her mother began grinding up tulip bulbs into a flour-like powder, mixing it with whatever scraps they could find to create something that barely resembled bread. The family also tried baking grass and leaves into makeshift loaves, anything that might fill their empty stomachs and provide even the smallest bit of nutrition. These weren't the beautiful tulip bulbs you might see in a garden today. They were bitter, tough, and extremely difficult to digest, but they were literally the difference between life and death for thousands of Dutch families. Audrey later described how the hunger was so intense that people would walk for miles just to trade family heirlooms for a single potato or a handful of sugar beets. The months of severe malnutrition took a devastating toll on Audrey's developing body. She suffered from acute anemia, respiratory problems, and edema, which is when your body swells up from lack of proper nutrition. By the time Allied forces finally liberated the Netherlands in 1945, 16-year-old Audrey weighed just 88 pounds on her 5'7" frame. The physical effects of this starvation period never fully left her. Throughout her entire Hollywood career, Audrey maintained an extremely thin figure that many people admired, but what they didn't realize was that her tiny waist and delicate frame were partly the result of her body never fully recovering from those months of eating tulip bulbs and grass bread. The malnutrition also contributed to health problems that would follow her for the rest of her life, including difficulties with pregnancy and ongoing digestive issues that made it hard for her to gain weight even when she tried. Fact 3. Her parents were Nazi sympathizers. Here's one of the most shocking contradictions in Audrey Hepburn's story. While she was secretly working with the Dutch resistance as a teenager, both of her parents had actually been supporters of fascist movements before the war even began. In the early 1930s, when Audrey was just a small child, her father Joseph Rustin and her mother Ella van Heemstra were both active members of the British Union of Fascists, a political party that admired Adolf Hitler and promoted many of the same racist ideas that would later fuel the Holocaust. Audrey's mother Ella was particularly involved in the fascist movement, even traveling to Germany in the mid-1930s to attend Nazi rallies and political events. During these trips, she actually had the opportunity to meet Adolf Hitler in person, and she was so impressed by what she saw that she returned to England and began writing articles for fascist publications, praising Hitler's leadership and promoting the Nazi ideology to British readers. The family's political beliefs were so strong that Audrey's father Joseph eventually became completely consumed by his fascist activities. In 1935, when Audrey was just 6 years old, he abandoned his wife and daughter entirely, moving to London where he could dedicate more time to his political work without the distractions of family life. This sudden abandonment left a deep emotional scar on young Audrey that would affect her for the rest of her life. What makes this situation even more remarkable is how dramatically the family's perspectives changed once they experienced the reality of Nazi occupation firsthand. When German forces invaded the Netherlands and Audrey witnessed the brutality and violence of the regime her parents had once supported, both she and her mother completely reversed their political views. Her mother Ella began quietly supporting the Dutch resistance, and Audrey herself started carrying messages for the underground movement. Fortunately for Audrey's Hollywood career, very few people knew about her parents' fascist connections during the 1950s when she became famous. If this information had been widely known at the time, it could have completely destroyed her reputation and ended her acting career before it really began, since America had just finished fighting a devastating war against the very ideology her parents had once promoted. Fact 4. She had a pet deer named Pippin. Of all the unusual pets that Hollywood stars have owned over the years, Audrey Hepburn's choice might be the most unexpected. A baby deer that became her constant companion and even went grocery shopping with her. This adorable story began in 1959 when Audrey was filming the movie Green Mansions, where she played a mysterious jungle girl who had a special connection with forest animals. The animal trainer working on the film came up with a practical solution to help Audrey bond with the deer that would appear in several important scenes. Instead of trying to train a wild animal to follow commands during filming, he suggested that Audrey take the baby deer home with her, so it would naturally want to stay close to her when the cameras were rolling. What started as a professional arrangement quickly turned into something much more personal when Audrey fell completely in love with the tiny fawn. She named the deer Pippin, though she often called him Ip for short, and he became much more than just a movie prop. Pippin would follow Audrey around her Beverly Hills home like a loyal dog, and she was so attached to him that she couldn't bear the thought of giving him back when filming wrapped up. The deer had bonded so strongly with Audrey that he seemed to think she was his mother, which made their relationship even more special. The most charming part of this story is how Pippin became part of Audrey's daily routine in ways that would seem impossible today. She would actually take the deer with her on trips to the local supermarket, where shoppers would do double takes at the sight of Hollywood's most elegant actress strolling through the aisles with a baby deer walking beside her shopping cart. Pippin was so well-behaved and gentle that store employees didn't seem to mind this unusual customer. Audrey was always known as an animal lover who had a natural way with creatures of all kinds, but Pippin held a special place in her heart. The deer lived with her for several months after filming ended, and their bond showed a softer, more playful side of the actress that fans rarely got to see. This wasn't just a publicity stunt or a temporary fascination. Audrey genuinely cared for Pippin as if he were a member of her family. Fact 5. Smoked 3 packs of cigarettes daily. Behind Audrey Hepburn's image as the picture of grace and elegance was a shocking secret that would surprise anyone who knew her only from her movies. She was one of the heaviest smokers in Hollywood, going through roughly 3 packs of cigarettes every single day. This means that during her peak smoking years, Audrey was consuming around 60 cigarettes daily, which is an absolutely staggering amount that would make even the most dedicated smokers today shake their heads in disbelief. What makes this habit even more surprising is how well Audrey managed to hide it from the public throughout her entire career. In the 1950s and 60s, when smoking was much more socially acceptable than it is today, Many celebrities were photographed with cigarettes as part of their glamorous image, but Audrey was rarely seen smoking in public or in official photographs. She was incredibly careful to maintain her wholesome, refined persona, which meant keeping her heavy smoking habit completely out of sight from fans and photographers. The smoking started during her teenage years in war-torn Netherlands, where cigarettes were one of the few ways people could cope with the constant stress and fear of living under Nazi occupation. What began as a wartime coping mechanism continued long after the war ended, eventually becoming such a severe addiction that Audrey found it nearly impossible to quit despite multiple attempts throughout her life. People who worked closely with Audrey on movie sets remember seeing her chain smoke between takes, lighting one cigarette immediately after finishing another, but the cameras never captured this side of her daily routine. She was so skilled at timing her smoking breaks that she could finish a cigarette, freshen up, and be ready for her close-up without any trace of the habit showing on screen. The smoking habit had serious consequences for Audrey's health as she got older, contributing to various respiratory problems and likely playing a role in some of the health issues that plagued her later years. Her heavy smoking was particularly ironic, given her work as a UNICEF ambassador, where she promoted health and wellness for children around the world, but she struggled with her own addiction to tobacco throughout most of her adult life, showing that even the most seemingly perfect celebrities had their personal battles to fight. Fact 6. Suffered 5 devastating miscarriages. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Audrey Hepburn's personal life was her struggle to become a mother, as she endured 5 devastating miscarriages throughout her adult years before finally having her 2 sons. For someone who dreamed of nothing more than raising a large family, these repeated losses were emotionally crushing and would shape many of the major decisions she made about her career and personal life. The first miscarriage occurred in 1955, shortly after her marriage to actor Mel Ferrer, and it set a painful pattern that would continue for years. Audrey desperately wanted children and was willing to do almost anything to make motherhood possible, including turning down major movie roles and taking extended breaks from her flourishing acting career whenever she became pregnant. The most tragic loss came during the filming of The Unforgiven in 1959, when Audrey was thrown from a horse during a riding scene and broke her back. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital recovering from her injuries, but the real devastation came months later when she lost the baby she had been carrying at the time of the accident. The film's director, John Huston, was so guilt-ridden about what happened that he later said he hated the movie and felt personally responsible for Audrey's loss. Medical experts believe that Audrey's history of severe malnutrition during World War II played a significant role in her pregnancy difficulties. Her extremely low body weight and the long-term health effects from eating tulip bulbs and grass during the Dutch famine likely made it much harder for her body to sustain pregnancies successfully. Each miscarriage made Audrey more determined, but also more cautious about future pregnancies. When she finally became pregnant with her first son, Sean, in 1959, she took an entire year off from acting and spent most of the pregnancy resting to ensure nothing would go wrong. This same careful approach helped her successfully carry her second son, Luca, to term in 1970. Audrey rarely spoke publicly about these losses, keeping this deeply personal struggle private throughout her career. Her determination to become a mother despite these repeated heartbreaks shows just how much family meant to her, and it explains why she was willing to step away from Hollywood at the height of her fame to focus on raising her children. Fact 7. Terrified of water and drowning. Despite her composed and fearless appearance on screen, Audrey Hepburn harbored an intense phobia of water and drowning that made filming certain scenes an absolute nightmare for both her and the production crews. This deep-seated fear became most apparent during the making of Two for the Road in 1967, where a seemingly simple pool scene turned into one of the most challenging moments of her entire acting career. The scene required Audrey's character to be thrown into a swimming pool by her co-star Albert Finney, which sounds like a straightforward bit of movie magic, but for someone with Audrey's water phobia, it was terrifying beyond belief. Her fear was so severe that she refused to do the scene unless extraordinary safety measures were put in place to ensure she wouldn't actually drown during filming. The movie's production team had to come up with an elaborate plan to make Audrey feel safe enough to perform the scene. They positioned multiple crew members underwater in scuba gear, ready to immediately grab her and bring her to safety the moment anything went wrong. These underwater safety divers were stationed at various points around the pool, completely out of camera range but close enough to reach Audrey within seconds if she started to panic or struggle in the water. Even with all these precautions in place, Audrey was visibly terrified throughout the filming of this scene, and if you watch Two for the Road today, you can actually see genuine fear on her face as she's being thrown into the pool. What audiences might have interpreted as acting was actually Audrey's real terror showing through, making her performance in that moment completely authentic, but for reasons the viewers never would have guessed. The origins of Audrey's water phobia aren't entirely clear, but some people close to her believed it might have stemmed from traumatic experiences during World War II, when she lived in constant fear and witnessed so much violence and death during her teenage years. Whether the fear developed during childhood or later in life, it was strong enough that Audrey would go to great lengths to avoid water scenes in her movies, and when she couldn't avoid them, she required these kinds of extreme safety measures to get through the filming. Fact 8. Size 10 feet, despite petite frame. For all of Audrey Hepburn's delicate, graceful beauty, she had one physical feature that she considered deeply embarrassing and went to great lengths to hide from the public: her unusually large feet. Despite standing 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing only around 100 pounds for most of her adult life, Audrey wore a size 10.5 shoe, which was significantly larger than what most people would expect from someone with such a petite frame. To put this in perspective, the average woman's shoe size in the 1950s and 60s was around a size 7 or 8, making Audrey's feet noticeably bigger than what was considered normal or attractive at the time. This size difference was even more striking because everything else about Audrey's appearance was so delicate and small, from her tiny waist to her slender arms and narrow shoulders. Audrey was incredibly self-conscious about her foot size and considered it one of her biggest physical flaws, often mentioning it alongside other features she disliked about herself. In interviews, she would openly criticize her appearance, saying things like, "I'd like not to have such angular shoulders, such big feet, and such a big nose," showing just how much these perceived imperfections bothered her despite being considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. To minimize the appearance of her large feet, Audrey developed a clever fashion strategy that became part of her signature look. She deliberately bought her famous ballet flats half a size larger than she actually needed, wearing size 11 shoes even though her feet were size 10.5. This extra room prevented her feet from looking squeezed or bulging out of the sides of her shoes, creating a cleaner, more elegant silhouette that helped disguise their actual size. Her preference for flat shoes also served a practical purpose beyond just hiding her foot size. As someone who had trained as a ballet dancer from a young age, Audrey was naturally more comfortable in flat shoes than high heels, and given her already considerable height of 5 feet 7 inches, she didn't need the extra boost that heels would provide. The combination of comfort and her desire to minimize her foot size made ballet flats the perfect choice, and they became such an essential part of her wardrobe that they're still associated with her elegant style today. Fact 9. Wasn't first choice for Holly Golightly? One of the biggest casting controversies in Hollywood history happened behind the scenes of Breakfast at Tiffany's, where author Truman Capote was absolutely furious that Audrey Hepburn got the role of Holly Golightly instead of his dream choice, Marilyn Monroe. Capote had written the character with Monroe specifically in mind, and he was so convinced that she was the only actress who could properly bring Holly to life that he fought tooth and nail with Paramount Pictures to make it happen. The character of Holly Golightly in Capote's original novella was a very different person from the charming, sophisticated woman that Audrey eventually portrayed on screen. In the book, Holly was much more rough around the edges, with a tougher background and a more overtly sexual personality that Capote felt matched Monroe's public image perfectly. He believed that Monroe's combination of vulnerability and raw sensuality was exactly what the character needed, and he couldn't imagine anyone else in the role. Unfortunately for Capote, Monroe's acting coach and advisor Paula Strasberg convinced her to turn down the part because she felt it would damage Monroe's reputation. Strasberg was concerned that playing what was essentially a high-class escort would reinforce negative stereotypes about Monroe and hurt her attempts to be taken seriously as a dramatic actress. This decision left Capote without his first choice and opened the door for other actresses to be considered. When Paramount executives decided to offer the role to Audrey instead, Capote felt completely betrayed by the studio system. He famously said that, "Paramount double-crossed me in every way and cast Audrey," showing just how bitter he was about the decision. From his perspective, the studio had promised him creative control over the casting, but then went ahead and chose someone who was the complete opposite of what he had envisioned for the character. The tension between Capote and the casting choice created an uncomfortable atmosphere during filming, with Audrey feeling the weight of the author's disapproval throughout the production. She knew that Capote was unhappy with her being in the role, which made her even more nervous about playing a character that was already quite different from her usual parts. Despite this behind-the-scenes drama, the movie became one of Audrey's most iconic films, though Capote never fully forgave the studio for what he saw as a betrayal of his original vision. Fact 10. Had a secret affair with JFK. Long before John F. Kennedy became one of America's most famous presidents, he had a romantic relationship with Audrey Hepburn that remained one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets for decades. This affair took place in the early 1950s when Kennedy was still a young senator from Massachusetts, and Audrey was just beginning to make her mark as a rising star after her breakthrough performance in Roman Holiday. The relationship began when Kennedy was already known for his charm and his reputation as one of Washington's most eligible bachelors, while Audrey was quickly becoming the darling of Hollywood with her unique combination of elegance and approachability. Kennedy had publicly stated that Roman Holiday was his favorite film, which makes you wonder whether his interest in the movie had more to do with its leading lady than its plot about a princess finding romance in Italy. Their romance was conducted with the utmost secrecy, as both Kennedy and Audrey were extremely careful about their public images and understood that any hint of their relationship could create scandals that might damage both of their careers. Kennedy was already being groomed for higher political office, and Audrey was working hard to establish herself as a serious actress rather than just another Hollywood starlet, so discretion was absolutely essential for both of them. The connection between Kennedy and Audrey remained strong even after their romantic relationship ended, and this became painfully clear on November 22, 1963, when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Audrey was on the set of My Fair Lady that day, and when the devastating news reached the film studio, she was the one who took on the heartbreaking responsibility of informing the entire cast and crew about what had happened. According to people who were there that day, Audrey gathered everyone together and asked them all to pray for the fallen president before climbing into a horse-drawn carriage that was being used as a prop for the movie. She pulled down the shades of the carriage and wept privately for the man who had once been such an important part of her life, showing a level of personal grief that went far beyond what most people would feel for a political leader they had never known personally. Fact 11. Used a safety pin on her eyelashes. One of the most surprising secrets behind Audrey Hepburn's iconic doe-eyed look was an incredibly dangerous beauty technique that would make modern makeup artists absolutely cringe. She and her makeup team would use a safety pin to separate each individual eyelash after applying mascara. This painstaking process was a crucial part of creating the wide-eyed, innocent expression that became Audrey's signature look in movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's and My Fair Lady. The technique began with applying 3 full coats of mascara to both upper and lower lashes, which would naturally cause the lashes to clump together and create a thick, heavy appearance. In the 1950s and 60s, mascara formulas were much thicker and stickier than the products we use today, so getting that perfectly separated, feathery look required much more work than simply brushing on a coat or two of modern mascara. After the 3 coats of mascara had been applied and were still slightly wet, Audrey's makeup artist, Alberto De Rossi, would take a regular safety pin and carefully work it between each individual eyelash, gently separating them to create the illusion that she had many more lashes than she actually did. This process had to be done with incredible precision because one wrong move with that sharp metal point could have seriously injured Audrey's eyes or damaged her natural lashes permanently. The entire eyelash separation process could take up to 20 minutes for both eyes, with De Rossi working slowly and methodically to ensure that every single lash was perfectly defined and separated from its neighbors. The result was a dramatic, almost doll-like appearance that made Audrey's eyes look larger and more expressive than they would have with regular mascara application alone. This technique was so important to Audrey's overall look that she refused to work with makeup artists who couldn't master the safety pin method. And when her beloved makeup artist Alberto De Rossi died, she was reportedly devastated and claimed that she felt like never making another movie again because no one else could recreate the precise eyelash work that had become such an essential part of her screen persona. The dangerous beauty secret remained largely unknown to the public until years later, when people in the film industry began sharing stories about the extreme lengths Audrey would go to achieve her perfect appearance. Fact 12. Changed her name to evade Nazis. The name Audrey Hepburn that became synonymous with Hollywood glamour wasn't actually the name this future star was born with, and the reason she changed it reveals just how dangerous life became during World War II. Born Audrey Kathleen Ruston in Brussels, Belgium, she was forced to completely abandon her birth name in 1940, when the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands made having any English-sounding identity a potential death sentence. When 11-year-old Audrey and her mother moved to the Dutch town of Arnhem, they quickly realized that the German forces were systematically targeting anyone they suspected of having British connections or sympathies. Having a surname like Ruston, which was clearly English in origin, could immediately mark someone as an enemy of the Nazi regime and lead to interrogation, imprisonment, or even execution without any trial or investigation. To protect herself and blend in with the local Dutch population, Audrey adopted the pseudonym Edda van Heemstra, which sounded completely Dutch and would raise no suspicions among German soldiers or their collaborators. The name Van Heemstra actually came from her mother's side of the family, as her mother was Baroness Ella van Heemstra, so using this surname wasn't entirely fabricated, but rather a strategic decision to emphasize the Dutch part of her heritage while hiding the English connections. Living under a false name meant that Audrey had to be constantly careful about how she introduced herself and what identity documents she carried, because being caught with the wrong papers or accidentally using her real name could have exposed her true background. For a young girl who was already dealing with the trauma of war, rationing, and constant fear, having to remember to respond to a completely different name added another layer of stress to an already terrifying situation. The name change also meant that Audrey had to suppress part of her own identity during some of the most formative years of her childhood and teenage development. She couldn't talk about her English father or acknowledge the British side of her family background, which must have been emotionally difficult for a girl who was already dealing with her father's abandonment and the uncertainty of whether she would ever see him again once the war ended. Fact 13. Exclusive custom perfume by Givenchy. In one of the most romantic gestures in fashion history, designer Hubert de Givenchy created a completely unique perfume exclusively for Audrey Hepburn that no one else in the world was allowed to wear. This custom fragrance, which he named L'Interdit, meaning the forbidden in French, was Givenchy's personal gift to his favorite muse and became as much a part of Audrey's signature style as her little black dresses and ballet flats. The creation of this exclusive perfume began in the early 1950s when Audrey and Givenchy first started working together on her film wardrobe for Sabrina. Their professional relationship quickly blossomed into a deep friendship and artistic partnership that would last for decades, with Givenchy understanding Audrey's personal style and preferences better than any other designer. He wanted to create something that would capture her essence in a way that went beyond just clothing, and perfume seemed like the perfect medium to express his vision of her personality. Givenchy spent months developing the perfect scent for Audrey, working with master perfumers to create a delicate floral fragrance that had notes of rose, jasmine, and violet, combined with a blend of woods and grasses that gave it a powdery, sophisticated finish. The perfume was designed to be subtle and elegant rather than overpowering, matching Audrey's own preference for understated beauty and refinement over flashy or dramatic effects. For several years, Audrey was the only person in the world who wore L'Interdit, making it truly one of a kind, and adding an extra layer of exclusivity to her already unique personal style. The perfume became so closely associated with her that people who knew her would immediately think of Audrey whenever they caught a hint of that particular scent, creating an invisible signature that was as distinctive as her voice or her laugh. Eventually, in 1957, Givenchy decided that the fragrance was too beautiful to keep exclusive to just one person, and he made the decision to release L'Interdit to the public so that other women could experience the magic of this carefully crafted scent. The perfume became an immediate success when it hit the market, with women around the world eager to wear the same fragrance that had been created specifically for one of Hollywood's most beloved style icons. Fact 14. Broke her back during horse stunt. One of the most terrifying accidents in Audrey Hepburn's career happened during the filming of The Unforgiven in 1959, when she was violently thrown from a horse and suffered a serious back injury that would affect her for the rest of her life. This Western film, which turned out to be Audrey's only venture into the cowboy movie genre, required her to do several horseback riding scenes, despite the fact that she was already nervous around horses and had very little experience with the large, unpredictable animals. The accident occurred during what should have been a routine riding scene, when the horse Audrey was on suddenly became spooked and reared up unexpectedly, throwing her off with tremendous force. She landed hard on the ground and immediately knew that something was seriously wrong, as intense pain shot through her spine, and she found it difficult to move without experiencing excruciating discomfort that made it clear this wasn't just a simple fall or bruise. Medical examinations revealed that Audrey had broken her back in the fall, which was an incredibly serious injury that required immediate hospitalization and extensive bed rest to prevent further damage to her spine. She spent 6 long weeks confined to a hospital bed, wearing a back brace, and following strict doctor's orders not to move around too much while her bones slowly healed, and the swelling in her spinal area gradually went down. The physical trauma of the accident was devastating enough, but what made this situation even more heartbreaking was that Audrey had been pregnant at the time of the fall, and the stress and injury from being thrown from the horse ultimately led to another miscarriage. This pregnancy loss was particularly crushing for Audrey because she desperately wanted children and had already experienced the pain of losing babies before this accident happened. The film's director, John Huston, was absolutely tormented by guilt over what had happened to Audrey, feeling that he was personally responsible for insisting on the horseback riding scenes that led to her injury and pregnancy loss. He became so upset about the accident that he later said he hated the entire movie and wished it had never been made, carrying the weight of what happened to Audrey for years afterward. After this traumatic experience, Audrey developed such a strong fear of horses that she never rode one again for the rest of her career. Fact 15. Never believed she was beautiful. Perhaps the most shocking revelation about Audrey Hepburn is that despite being considered one of the most beautiful women who ever lived, she genuinely could not understand why people saw her as attractive and spent her entire life being deeply insecure about her appearance. This heartbreaking truth was revealed by her son Luca Dotti in interviews years after her death, when he shared intimate details about his mother's relationship with her own reflection and the cruel way she would criticize herself in private. According to Luca, Audrey would regularly stand in front of mirrors and express complete bewilderment about her global reputation as a beauty icon, often saying things like, "I don't understand why people see me as beautiful," while pointing out what she considered to be her major physical flaws. She was convinced that her nose was too big, her feet were too large, her chest was too flat, and her overall frame was too skinny to be considered attractive by any reasonable standard. These self-critical sessions weren't just occasional moments of doubt that everyone experiences, but rather a consistent pattern throughout her adult life, where Audrey would genuinely puzzle over the disconnect between how the world saw her and how she saw herself. She would look at magazine covers featuring her image and wonder if people were somehow seeing a completely different person than the one she observed in her own mirror every morning. In interviews during her career, Audrey would openly discuss her perceived physical shortcomings, saying things like, "I'd like to be not so flat-chested, I'd like not to have such angular shoulders, such big feet, such a big nose," showing that her insecurities weren't hidden from the public but were actually something she felt comfortable discussing with journalists and reporters. What makes this self-doubt even more poignant is that Audrey's unique look was precisely what set her apart from other actresses of her era and made her such an enduring style icon. While other Hollywood stars of the 1950s and 60s had more traditional hourglass figures, Audrey's slender frame, delicate features, and distinctive facial structure created a completely new standard of beauty that influenced fashion and film for decades. Yet she never seemed to recognize or appreciate the revolutionary impact of her own appearance, remaining convinced throughout her life that she was somehow not living up to conventional standards of attractiveness.